She wasn't the kind of girl people noticed. She was quiet, always sitting at the back of the classroom, always looking out the window. While others talked about sports, movies, or new phones, her world was different. She didn't have much, but she had a dream, a soft dream that lived deep inside her heart. She wanted to play the piano. No one really knew this about her. She didn't talk much, not because she didn't want to, but because she always felt like her voice didn't matter. But every day when school ended, she walked home the long way, not because she liked walking, but because her path went past the old community center. The place had a big room with glass windows. Inside there was a grand piano, dusty and old, but beautiful in her eyes. She would stop there for a few minutes every day, just stand outside and watch. Sometimes people came to practice, and she would listen to every note like it was magic. Her fingers would move in the air like she was playing along. That was the only time she smiled. At home, things were not easy. Her family was kind, but busy trying to make ends meet. There was no extra money for music classes or instruments. She had once asked her mother if they could buy a small keyboard. Her mother looked at her with tired eyes and said gently, "Maybe one day, sweetheart." She didn't ask again, but even without a piano, she didn't give up. She watched videos on her old phone, tutorials, performances, anything that had piano music. She listened carefully, trying to memorize the sound of each note. She started tapping on the table at home, pretending it was a keyboard. She even drew little keys on a notebook page and practiced finger movements. Still, she'd never touched a real piano. One cold evening, as she stood outside the community center like always, an old man inside saw her. He was the janitor, sweeping the floor. He opened the door and asked, "You like music?" She nodded shyly. He smiled. "Come inside. It's warmer in here." She stepped in slowly, feeling nervous. The room smelled like dust and old books. The piano sat in the corner, like a sleeping giant. She stared at it, heart pounding. The janitor noticed. "You want to try?" he asked kindly. Her eyes widened. "Can I?" "Why?" He smiled and nodded. "Just don't break it," he joked. She walked over and sat down, touching the keys for the first time in her life. They were smooth and cold. She pressed one softly. The note echoed through the empty hall. It wasn't perfect, but to her it was the most beautiful sound in the world. The janitor didn't say much. He just watched as she pressed. A few more keys, trying to play something she had memorized from a video. It was slow, clumsy, and off-key, but it had something real, something honest. From that night, everything changed. The janitor told her she could come in after hours as long as she helped sweep the floor. She agreed immediately. Every evening, after finishing her homework, she quietly walked to the center, picked up a broom, did her part, and then sat down at the piano. She didn't tell anyone, not her classmates, not even her family. This was her little world. A secret dream that finally had a place to grow. She wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. But her fingers got stronger, her ears got sharper, and little by little, the girl who once only dreamed of music was now living. Inside it, she didn't know what the future held. She just knew she loved the piano. She wasn't going to stop. She had been secretly practicing the piano at the community center for weeks now. Every evening, after sweeping the floors, she sat down at the old piano and pressed the keys with care and hope. Her fingers were still slow, but they had started to remember the songs. She could now play small tunes from memory, and the sound made her heart feel warm. It wasn't perfect, but it was hers. At school, no one knew. To everyone else, she was. Still that quiet girl who didn't speak much, who wore old shoes and carried a second-hand bag. Most days, she ate her lunch alone under a tree. She didn't mind. She liked the peace. And when other kids laughed and joked around, she kept thinking about the piano. She even tapped her fingers on the table sometimes, copying the notes in. Her head one morning during class, the music teacher made an announcement, "We'll be having a fun music day next week. Anyone who can play an instrument or sing can show their talent to the class." A few kids got excited right away. Some talked about singing pop songs, some about showing off their guitar or violin skills. Then the teacher asked, "Anyone here who plays the piano?" She raised her hand slowly. Her heart was beating fast. She wasn't even sure why she did. Maybe she wanted to see what it felt like to be seen. Maybe she was just tired of hiding. The moment her hand went up, silence fell over the room. And then came the laugh. It was loud and sharp. One of the boys sitting near the front laughed, so hard he almost dropped his pen. "You," he said, pointing at her with disbelief. "You can play the piano?" The whole class turned to look at her. Some students giggled quietly. Others just stared. The girl looked down, feeling her cheeks burn. She didn't say anything. "What do you play on?" the boy asked, smirking. Even the teacher gave a small smile, trying to calm the room. "All right, let's not be rude," he said, though his tone wasn't very strong. The moment passed, and the class moved on, but the feeling stayed with her. Wouldn't go away at lunch. She sat under her usual tree, feeling quiet inside. The words from class kept echoing in her mind. She knew she wasn't good yet. She knew she didn't have the kind of skills others had. It hurt. Not because they thought she was bad, but because they didn't even give her a chance. Still, something in her refused to break. She thought about the first time she touched the piano, the soft note that echoed through the empty hall, the kind smile of the janitor. The hours she had spent practicing in silence, that wasn't nothing, that was real. That was hers. She took out her notebook from her bag. Inside were hand-drawn piano keys and notes she had written herself. She flipped through the pages slowly, one by one, reminding herself how far she had come. Every note she had learned was proof that she could, even if no one believed it yet. She looked up at the sky and smiled a little. Maybe one day, she whispered, that same boy who had laughed at her would see what she could really do. But for now, she would keep practicing, quietly, patiently. She didn't need to show off. Her time would come. When it did, it wouldn't be about proving them wrong. It would be about proving herself right, because deep down she already knew she didn't need the world to clap. She just needed to keep playing after that day. In class, she didn't say anything more about playing the piano. She didn't try to explain herself, didn't try to prove anything. She just went back to her quiet routine school during the day. And then the community center in the evening. The janitor had started to notice how serious she was. She no longer needed to be told which keys to press. Her hands moved with purpose. Slow, yes, but steady. Sometimes he stood near the door and listened while pretending to clean. The sound wasn't fancy or professional. There was something about it that felt special, honest, real. One evening, after she finished sweeping the floor and sat at the piano like always, the janitor walked over and placed a small notebook beside her. "This belonged to my daughter," he said softly. "She used to play too. Maybe it can help you." She looked at the notebook with wide eyes. Inside were handwritten notes, small exercises, and simple songs. Her fingers gently touched the pages like they were made of glass. She whispered, from that day she began following the old music notebook. It wasn't just about copying what was written, it was about learning how to feel the music. Her fingers started to move more confidently. She learned how to listen closely, how to press the keys with emotion, not just with strength. Every mistake taught her something. And even when no one was watching, she played as if the whole world was listening. One night, the power went out in the building. The lights blinked and died. She sat there in the dark, the piano still in front of her. The janitor was about to close up, but she said softly, "Can I just try one more time? Just for 5 minutes?" He nodded and lit a candle near the piano end. That flickering light, she played. The notes sounded richer, somehow, as if the darkness made them louder. Each note echoed through the empty room, and the janitor leaned against the wall with his eyes closed. When she finished, he said nothing for a while. Then he simply said, "You've got something." She smiled quietly. That small sentence meant more than any award. At school, no one knew she was still practicing. She didn't talk about the music. Day again. Some students had already forgotten the moment. But she hadn't. It stayed with her, not as pain, but as fuel. It pushed her to get better. She began waking up early in the morning and tapping out songs on the kitchen table. Her family thought she was just being playful, but they didn't know she was working hard. She had no teacher, no lessons, no fancy keyboard at home. But she had heart, and that was more than enough. One weekend she sat on a park bench near a street performer playing a violin. She watched him closely, learning how he moved, how he connected with people. She didn't say anything, but she went home. With a head full of ideas, the next evening at the community center she tried something new. She didn't follow the notebook. Instead, she closed her eyes and tried to play what she felt. Her hands moved slowly at first, then picked up speed. It wasn't a real song. It didn't have a name, but it had emotion. It sounded like her story. Janitor watched from the hallway, smiling. In that moment, she was no longer just a girl trying to play piano. She was a girl creating something. Something from the heart. Something no one could laugh at. She didn't know what was coming next. But one thing was clear. She was no longer a beginner. She was becoming a musician. Weeks passed, and the weather started to warm. Spring was coming. Trees began to bloom, and the school announced something big, the annual talent show. It was open to all students, and everyone was talking about it. Some were excited to show off their dance skills. Others were planning to sing, act, or perform with their bands. Posters were stuck on every wall with bold letters. Sign up for your chance to shine. She saw the poster too. At first, she didn't even think about signing up. Her past experience in music class still lived in her memory. The laughter, the jokes. But something inside her had changed since then. The girl who once stood in fear was now slowly standing with quiet strength. She had been practicing daily, sometimes even losing track of time. She had finished the janitor's daughter's music notebook and started creating her own. Plain notebook filled with notes, keys, ideas, and even her own simple melodies. One evening, as she sat at the piano after her cleaning work, the janitor walked in with a folded piece of paper in his hand. "Saw this at school," he said, placing it gently on the piano. "Thought you might want it." It was a copy of the talent show form. She stared at it in silence. He said nothing more, just walked away to sweep the hallway. But his small gesture meant a lot. She held the paper in her hands, unsure. Fear and excitement were fighting inside her. But deep down, she knew this was her chance. Not to prove others wrong, but to prove herself right. The next day, she walked up to the talent show table and quietly wrote her name on the list. Under the performance type column, she wrote piano solo. A few students noticed and whispered, "Isn't that the girl from music class?" one asked. Another just raised an eyebrow and said, "This is going to be interesting." She didn't react. She just folded her arms and walked away. The boy who had laughed at her in class had also signed up. He was known for playing guitar and was popular among the students. He was loud, confident, and loved attention. When he saw her name on the list, he gave a small smirk. "Hope you don't freeze on stage," he said in passing. She looked at him, but didn't reply. Instead, she thought about every single night. She had spent pressing the keys alone. She thought about the janitor who believed in her. And she thought about how far she had come without anyone cheering her on in the days leading up to the show. She practiced harder than ever. She chose a piece that wasn't fast or fancy. It was something she had created herself. Soft melody with simple notes that told a quiet story. Her story. She didn't have a fancy dress or a big group of friends cheering her on. But she had something else, heart. And that, she believed, was enough. The night before the show, she barely slept. Her hands were shaking, and her mind was racing. But instead of letting fear win, she went to the community center, even though it was late. The janitor was surprised to see her. She just said softly, "One last practice." She sat at the piano and played with her eyes closed. When she finished, the janitor clapped gently and said, "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember this: you've already done something most never do." "You didn't quit," she nodded, holding back tears. She walked home under the stars that night, holding her notebook close. Tomorrow was the big day, and whether the crowd clapped or stayed silent, she would walk onto that stage. She would play. The day of the talent show finally arrived. She woke up early, even before the sun rose. Her heart was beating faster than usual, and her hands felt cold. She stood in front of the mirror for a long time, trying to calm herself. She didn't. have a fancy dress, but she wore the neatest clothes she had. She brushed her hair twice, then once more, and finally packed her little music notebook into her bag like it was something precious. At school, the whole place buzzed with excitement. The hall was decorated with balloons, lights, and a big banner that read, "Talent Show, Let Your Light Shine." Students were lining up backstage, warming up their voices, tuning their guitars, stretching for dance moves and chatting loudly. Laughter filled the air. Friends cheered for each other and clicked pictures. But she stood quietly in one corner. Clutching her hands together, she looked around. No one was really looking at her. She wasn't surrounded by friends or fans. But that didn't matter. She hadn't come for applause. She had come to play. The performances began. The first act was a dance group that made the crowd clap and cheer. Then a boy sang a pop song. A girl performed magic tricks. Everyone seemed so confident, so full of energy. Her name was still a few spots away, but every minute felt like an hour. Then came the boy with the guitar, the same one who had laughed at her in music class. He walked onto the stage like he owned it. He smiled at the crowd, made a few jokes, and strummed his guitar with ease. His performance was loud, fast, and full of excitement. People clapped along, some even stood up and shouted his name. When he finished, he took a deep bow. The crowd loved him. She stood backstage, heart pounding. Her turn was next. The teacher called her name into the microphone. For a moment, the hall became quiet. People looked around, some surprised. A few even whispered, "Wait, she's performing?" She took a deep breath and walked slowly to the stage. The lights were bright, and the piano stood in the center. She could feel hundreds of eyes watching her. Her legs felt weak, but she kept walking until she reached the piano bench. She sat down, placed her notebook beside her, and gently touched the keys. Her fingers shook. She closed her eyes for a moment, blocking out everything: the crowd, the fear, the past. She thought about the quiet evenings at the community center, about the first time she pressed a key, about the janitor's kind words. And then she thought of how far she had come. She opened her eyes and played the first note. It was soft, so soft you could hear someone breathe across the room. Then came the second note. Then the third. Slowly, the tune began to unfold. It wasn't loud or flashy. It didn't have fast runs or complicated chords, but it had feeling. Every note told a piece of her story. Sadness, hope, strength, all wrapped inside the melody. The hall became still. No one whispered. No one moved. People listened, really listened. She played like no one else was there. Her eyes focused, her hands flowing across the keys. Her fingers knew where to go. Her heart guided them. The music filled the space not with noise, but with emotion. When she reached the final note, she held it for a second longer and slowly lifted her hands. Silence. For a moment, no one clapped. No one made a sound. Then, like a wave, the room exploded into applause. People stood up. Some clapped slowly, others clapped hard. But all of them were clapping for her. She looked up, eyes wide. In that moment, she realized something. They had heard her. Really heard her. The applause still rang in her ears as she stepped off the stage. Her hands were still shaking, but not from fear this time. It was something else, something new. She'd never felt like that before. It was like something heavy had lifted from her chest, like she could finally breathe fully. She walked backstage slowly, unsure what to do next. A few students looked at her differently now, not with pity or confusion, but with surprise, and something close to respect. One girl smiled and softly said, "That was really beautiful." Another just gave her a small nod. She wasn't used to this. She had spent so long in silence, sitting in corners, walking quietly through crowded halls. Now, for the first time, people saw her not as the quiet girl, but as the girl who played something unforgettable. She sat on a bench near the back wall and watched the rest of the show. Her heart was still full. It didn't matter who won. It didn't matter if anyone remembered her name tomorrow. What mattered was that she had faced her fear. She had stepped into the light, and for those few minutes, the whole room had listened. When the show ended, everyone gathered in the school hall. Teachers thanked the performers. A few students were called up to receive small awards: best vocal, most creative, crowd favorite. When her name wasn't called, she felt a small pinch inside. But then, she reminded herself, she didn't do it for a trophy. She looked around and noticed the boy with the guitar standing nearby. For a moment, their eyes met. He didn't laugh, didn't smirk, just looked at her with a blank face, then slowly walked over. She didn't know what he would say, maybe something rude again. But when he stood in front of her, he paused, scratched the back of his neck and said, "That was different. I didn't expect that." She nodded. "Thanks." Then, without another word, he walked away. That was enough for her. On her way home that evening, she held her notebook close to her chest. The stars were out again, just like the night before. The streets were quiet. As she passed by the community center, she saw the lights still on. She peeked inside and saw the janitor sweeping the floor. She pushed the door open. He looked up and smiled. "I heard it went well." She walked over to the piano and sat down. "They clapped," she said softly. He leaned on his broom and nodded. "Of course they did." She placed her fingers on the keys but didn't play. Instead, she looked at the man who had given her a chance when no one else did. "Thank you for everything." He smiled again but said nothing, just gave her a small nod and returned to sweeping. She stayed a little longer that night, not to practice, not to prepare, just to play for herself. No crowd, no stage, just her and the music. She closed her eyes and let her fingers move. The song that came out wasn't the same as before. It was lighter, free. When she finished, she sat in silence, listening to the soft echo of the final note in her heart. Something had changed forever. People had laughed at her once, but now they had listened. And even if no one ever clapped for her again, she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the girl who sat quietly at the back of the room. She was a pianist. Time moved on, but something inside her stayed different after that night. The talent show came and went, but the feeling of playing on that stage, the lights, the silence, the sound of her own music, never left her heart. It stayed with her like a quiet fire that kept her going, even on ordinary days. School became a little easier after that. People didn't whisper anymore when she passed by. Some even smiled. Few classmates started greeting her. Not many. Enough to make her feel seen. She still sat alone sometimes, still preferred quiet corners, but now it felt like a choice, not something forced. And most of all, she kept playing. Every evening she returned to the community center. The piano had become her safe place. The janitor always gave her a soft smile when she walked in, as if he already knew she belonged there. Some nights she practiced from the old notebook. Other nights she just let her fingers play whatever her heart felt. One afternoon, as she was finishing school, her music teacher called her into the staff room. She felt nervous at first. She thought maybe she had done something wrong. But the teacher smiled and said, "I heard about your performance. I didn't expect that. It surprised many of us." She stayed quiet, unsure what to say. Then the teacher placed a small flyer in front of her. It was for a local music program that offered weekend classes and training for students who couldn't afford private lessons. "There's an open spot," the teacher said. "I think you should apply. I can write a recommendation for you." Her heart skipped a beat. She took the flyer in her hands and stared at it. Could this really happen? That night, she told the janitor about it, like he had been waiting. "For this moment all along, you should go for it," he said. "You've worked hard. Now let the world hear more." So she applied. A week later, she received the letter. Accepted. The classes began on weekends. The music school was small, but to her, it felt like walking into a dream. Real teachers. Real instruments. Other kids who loved music too. Was nervous at first, everyone else seemed better trained. But soon, she found her place. Her passion made up for everything else. She worked harder than ever before. Some weekends were tough, traveling to the center, finishing homework, keeping up. With both school and music, it wasn't easy. She didn't complain, because now, for the first time, she felt like her dream was no longer just a wish. It was something real, something growing. One afternoon, during a break at music class, a teacher came over and asked, "How did you first learn piano?" Smiled softly. "I swept floors. Then I practiced every night, one key at a time." The teacher looked surprised. "Well," he said, "whatever you did, it worked. Keep going. You have something special." Her journey had started in silence, in a dusty room with no one watching. But now people were beginning to hear her. Not just her music, but her story too. Years later, when she stood on a different stage at a bigger concert, in front of a much larger crowd, she played a song she had written herself. The first note was soft, just like before. The room fell quiet, and just like that first time, everyone listened, because the girl they once ignored, the one they laughed at, had become something more. She had become the music, and the world finally understood.